You can find links to today's guests' workshops at creativityfound.co.uk. If you do get in touch, don't forget to mention Creativity Found.
Basically, as soon as I started, I was just hooked. From that point, it definitely became an obsession. When I said, "Oh, I made it," they said, "Could you make me one?" And it was "Oh, well, I've never thought of doing that." Dipping your toe in, and if it doesn't work, then moving to something else. That was probably the most challenging thing I found.
Hi, I'm Claire, founder of Open Stage Arts drama and singing classes for adults. For this podcast, I chat with people who have found or refound their creativity as adults. We'll explore their childhood experiences of the arts, discuss how they came to the artistic practices they now love, and consider the barriers they may have experienced between the two. We'll also explore what it is that people value and gain from their newfound artistic pursuits, and how their creative lives enrich their practical, necessary, everyday lives. For this episode, I'm speaking with Susan Widlake, former IT auditor and world traveller turned milliner. Hi Susan, how are you?
Hi Claire, lovely to see you again.
Thank you, and you. Over the past few years, you have turned something you love into a creative business. What is it you do now?
So I've gone from hardware in IT to now being a milliner. So it's hardware to headwear. And I now make hats for events, occasions, performances, and I'm starting doing workshops too.
That's so exciting. Can't wait to find out more. Let's go back to the early days. Did you have a creative childhood?
I was really fortunate that I had a close relationship with all my grandparents. And as I was thinking what happened, I realised that one grand taught me needlework, another one taught me knitting. My grandfather actually taught me how to make paper flowers. And then there was my other grandfather who taught woodwork. So really from my grandparents. My parents were really academic. One was a maths teacher, one was a physics teacher. So I think the creativity came from the previous generation.
Yeah. And how did that play out in education?
I went to a very, very academic school, and I was actually interested in looking at food technology because I came into doing cake decorating as part of one of the school competitions and absolutely loved it. But there was a lot of pressure on me to do something academic, so I went and did modern languages. As one does. So not the sciences. I was definitely more an arts sort of person.
What did you do after school?
Well, I went to university and I actually studied Russian and Bulgarian. So just a little bit out of the ordinary, and spent a year in Russia during the time that the Berlin Wall was coming down. So it was an absolutely amazing time from a historical perspective to be there, but also one in terms of getting your creativity working. Things like you couldn't buy clothes, but you could actually get fabric. So started making some really basic clothes out there and just being creative with whatever ingredients you could find in the shops, because we actually still had sort of ration books and so on. So yeah, it really challenged the imagination.
That's amazing. Tell me, first of all, why Russian?
uh, I mentioned my grandparents earlier. They used to go every year to Russia on holiday because my grandfather was a councillor in London and they were doing a twinning. So my grand thought she would learn some Russian so she could offer visiting dignitaries cups of tea. And so from that moment on, she would then be sort of speaking Russian. One year my grandfather was ill, so my gran took me with her, and I must have been about 13 or so, and I was just absolutely captivated and thought, yes, I want to learn this. So that's why I went and did Russian.
Wow, that's brilliant. Tell me a bit more about that year in Russia. I know you've told me you had to queue for food and things.
Yeah, it was actually the year that the McDonald's opened in Moscow, and I was in a place called Ronyej, which was about 12 hours by train from Moscow, and a group of us managed to get special visas to go up to Moscow, got off the overnight train and went and queued for McDonald's for our breakfast. And I have to say, it's probably the first and last time I've ever eaten a McDonald's. And then we took back hot apple pies for our Russian roommates and were very proud and gave them to them, saying, "This is Western civilization, have a taste of this." And after 12 hours in a rucksack and being cold, they weren't that impressed. But no, it was an amazing time, and we had very restrictive visas, but the university organised certain trips for us to go on. So we were able to go and see several of the different former Soviet republics as they were then. So Uzbekistan, Estonia, Georgia, and just travel around. And that was amazing. And the highlight, I think, was going on the Trans-Siberian Express.
I bet. After your degree, you chose to study accounting. Why did you choose that path?
Yeah, I know I shouldn't have done really, but it was at the point as the East and the West were opening up and Margaret Thatcher was in charge, and she was saying about how they wanted accountants and they were training accountants to speak Russian. And I thought, well, I can speak Russian. I'll train as an accountant. Except I really didn't like maths that much. So, not a great move, but I loved IT. So I moved more then into the IT side of the financials thing because I found sort of the programming and so on, you were able to relate to languages and how structures work together and that. It's a really bizarre thing, but some of the best IT people I know have got, really good linguistic backgrounds.
I can imagine. So while you're traveling through the world of IT, are you able to keep up with the skills that you learnt from your grandparents? Are you able to do any of that in your spare time?
It was quite strange. I remember now going back that I would always make cakes. So if there were special events or whatever, I would make a cake for it. There was a gentleman who was retiring and I made him an allotment cake, and there was another person who supported Norwich who was leaving, so I made him one with a yellow canary on it. So I was doing cakes. And then also, I joined Capital One when they started in the UK, in Nottingham, the credit card company. They were US based and they had a very performance sort of culture at the end of year that each team would have to put on a little bit of entertainment. So I ended up making costumes for IT administrators so they could dress up like the pink ladies in Greece. So it was just, fun like that. So I think it just sort of kept me going that way. And yeah, definitely outside work, I would be going round to fabric shops, open studios, and just doing things practically.
And you were traveling a lot as well. Were you able to keep it up while traveling?
I changed jobs from Capital One and moved into the pharmaceutical industry as an auditor and was basically traveling as an auditor for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time. So later on in my career, when I would actually be 3 weeks in a particular country or place, I would try and incorporate things into the weekend. So I would spend one day just exploring fabric shops in Barcelona, or I managed to get lost in the middle of Shanghai trying to find Ribbon Street, but I found it and got some ribbon. So, yes, I was able to sort of incorporate that and travel in my suitcase. I'd have a little lunchbox, which I would pack sort of a sewing kit and ribbon and things like that.
Good for you. Little travelling craft box.
Hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So, how did you start making hats? Because that's obviously a bit more of a specific discipline.
It actually came purely by chance. I loved going to the Victoria and Albert Museum and used to work over the other side of London in sort of towards Richmond way and was living in Cambridge. So sometimes I would sort of detour on a Friday night when they were open late, go to the museum before struggling through the rush hour. So one day I actually went along to a taster course that they were running in conjunction with a Stephen Jones hat exhibition in 2009. And basically, as soon as I started, I was just hooked. And I realized it sort of combined the sewing skills I'd got and also things like the sugar flour making. And then I even remembered paper flour making with my grandfather. And it sort of combined all the things that I liked into something that I loved to wear. And more importantly, was definitely portable to fit in a suitcase. So I just got hooked. And from that moment on, started taking courses at weekends. I'd even take holidays from work and go traveling and study new skills. And from that point, it definitely became an obsession.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
At this stage, then, you're busy with work and you're making hats in your spare time.
Yeah.
Did you feel you had enough of a balance between creativity and career and everyday life?
No, I actually found it quite difficult. As I said, I would be away for sort of 3 weeks at a time, and it could be quite lonely as well, being sort of the only female in a team of males too. No one else wanted to go fabric shopping, but I wanted to do bigger things. So there's a limit to what you can fit in the suitcase. You can't fit a huge hat block. So I was making sort of small trims and so on. And it really was every weekend. I was living in Switzerland at the time. I would be going off, just hopping over the border to France and Germany and seeing what I could pick up. And I got an amazing deal in a flea market in Germany with a man who sold me one of these wooden hat molds. And he told me it was a doorstop. And I thought, no, that's definitely for making a hat. So it was interesting that the hat making isn't as popular and as widespread. So I actually got some absolutely brilliant bargains. And Switzerland's expensive, but I actually found some hat stuff which was cheaper than a chicken sandwich. So I did really well there.
So your language skills are coming into use here then?
Sometimes, but I didn't really speak French, and I walked away once from a store when the gentleman told me the price, and I was trying to work out the numbers, and then he called something after me, and I thought, I understand that number. Yes, I'll have it. That's a really good deal. I think I realised that it could potentially be more than a hobby. There were two occasions. Once, I'm a big rugby fan, so several of my hats have got red roses and are named after Twickenham and Richmond and so on. But I was actually going to the Rugby World Cup when it was in the UK and wearing one of my cloche hats that I'd made myself, little bit different, but I had three different people of very different demographics and ages saying, where did you get that hat? It's wonderful. So when I said, oh, I made it, they said, could you make me one? And it was oh, well, I've never thought of doing that before. And I sort of put it on the back burner and thought, okay, well, I used to make them then for friends, as presents and so on, but okay. So I went out to Switzerland, and one day I was sitting on the tram and I was wearing this very small sort of 1940s style percher. And I think the lady said to me, I really like your hat. Where did you get it? And I think I said to her, I made it myself. And that's what made me think, people really do like them. So I took a big decision end of 2018, and I thought, okay, if I don't do it now, I never will. I'll come back to the UK and start following the millinery dream.
That sounds super exciting, possibly a little bit scary. How did you physically go about making millinery your business?
Well, it was daunting. I'd been used to dealing with big corporates, and now doing things on a very small scale on yourself. I just thought, how do I do it? So I knew the theory, but how to do it in practice. And I was really fortunate to find the British Library have a small business centre called the Business and Intellectual Property Centre. And I went down to London and they had a free workshop for a day about how to get started in your own creative business. And that was one of the very first things I did at the beginning of 2019. And I was going through that checklist and I thought, yes, I've actually then managed to follow those steps. One of the biggest things for me was, as an auditor, you're always used to wanting everything to be perfect. You're looking for the problems and the errors. And actually getting something out there when I wasn't 100% sure whether that was quite the right font or whether it was quite the right design, that was a big change. So doing more testing, dipping your toe in, and if it doesn't work, then moving to something else, that was probably the most challenging thing I found. I went and set up at various different local fairs, so say craft fairs and wedding fairs, did a few talks and that, and was just working out exactly where the right places were and what were the right groups to join. So there were a couple of networking groups, and that was really helpful in finding other women who were doing similar things, as in running businesses on their own, because I'd been working in such a male environment for 20 odd years. It was nice to actually talk to women for a change, and having their input as opposed to someone saying, oh yeah, you're wearing a hat. So yeah, that was very, very good. And I also discovered I'm in sort of the Cambridgeshire, Essex, Suffolk borders. And in Sudbury in Suffolk, there's still some of the UK silk weavers. And I discovered them and went to their actual factories and their shops and just thought, this is a local material and it's absolutely beautiful. Why aren't other milliners using it? So it's a little bit of a hidden secret, but it's also, I'm guessing, what is my unique selling point. So I've taken the local silk and have been developing a range in that, with starting with very basic headbands. So if you just want to wear something a bit prettier and it's not too expensive, you start with a headband, then going on to more smaller hats, which are, slightly more elegant, that you'd wear perhaps for a wedding or something, and then a real big statement piece in multicolours, which is definitely a one for the races for someone who wants to stand out. So I've really developed sort of this local usage, and I get my wire just down the road in Essex too, so it's definitely inspired by my global travels. So the huge hat's called Barcelona because it's a riot of colours after Gaudi, but it's created locally here.
I love sharing my guests' stories with you, but podcasting isn't cheap. There are hosting fees and software costs, tech to buy and time to invest in planning and editing to make sure the guests sound great and listeners hear the best content. If you would like to financially support Creativity Found, please visit ko-fi.com/creativityfoundpodcast. You've mentioned Barcelona and you have hats named after other places. You're inspired by your travels. Can you tell me a bit more about that inspiration?
It can be a little thing. I have something that is based on a staircase, a spiral staircase that I saw in Riga, and I just saw the shape and I thought, oh, that's a nice shape. I'll take a photo of that. I saw a sculpture in Melbourne, which was sort of a bit jagged and origami looking. So I've used that in a piece as well. And when I actually went to Sydney and saw the Sydney Opera House right up close and realised it's all tiny little mosaic tiles, I've got a hat which is sort of like origami and ribbon folding, which is called Sydney because it's a wave shape and it's blue and the harbour. And yeah, sometimes the names come really quickly, or sometimes I'll make something think, oh, that reminds me of when I was in Paxos and the sea urchins and so on. So it's definitely places and buildings that I've visited.
That sounds really lovely and so relevant to your story so far with the languages and the travel that you've done. Such a good combination.
Yeah.
Tell me about your face masks.
Oh gosh. Well, I have to say, 2020 wasn't a great year to be a milliner, especially when you'd just finished 2019 and you'd got your fairs sorted out, where you were going to be doing your demonstrating, where you were going. And it was, like most people, I think the first few weeks of lockdown, I was just gobsmacked what's happening here. So I initially started sewing, the scrubs bags and the scrubs, and then started making masks for friends and family. Then was just getting asked, well, can I buy them from you? And I thought, oh no, I'm not making them to buy. And then someone saying, yes, you can't make hats. Why not make masks? So I started making masks and just continued on, social media and putting messages out there that this is what I was doing now, and saw some fabric with crocuses on it. And I live near Saffron Walden, so saffron and crocuses. Made some with crocuses on them, went into the local tourist information and said to them, thank you so much for retweeting me. And they said, oh, can we buy some and stock them in here? It was, oh, okay. So I started making crocus masks for tourist information. A local gallery who'd been stocking my headband said, we're in Finchingfield, we've got a windmill, can we have some windmills? So I did windmills for them. And then moved into working with a local theatre group in doing sequin masks. And it was really the sequin masks which totally turned my year around. I'd got some people testing them for me, saying, were they comfortable? Were they washable? Could they breathe okay from them? And during that sort of testing phase, a couple of them got in touch saying, we've been stopped at the school gates by people saying, where did you get your sequins from? And I actually had a waiting list before I'd even finished sewing them. I thought, wow. Someone I didn't know saw them on Instagram and said, can I have one? I'm going to London, can you get me one by Friday? So I delivered it to her in her hairdresser's. She sent me along the road to her friend who owned a boutique, went in there and they said, can we stock them? Can we have 60? And it was, ah. So yes, they then sent them down for a PR pitch and they ended up on Lorraine on the television. And I didn't stop sewing for 3 months. I think I was still sewing sequins on not Christmas Day. I think I had Christmas Day off, but then there were a few people who wanted them for New Year, so I started sewing sequin masks. But the contact from that and the revenue I made enabled me to then take a specific millinery business course at the beginning of January of this year, and that's helped me be a lot more structured and professional, I think, in the way that I'm approaching the business now.
Speaking of professional, this is something I ask a lot of my guests who have creative businesses, and that's whether you manage to balance the business side of things with the joy of creating.
It's tricky, I have to say. So, for the first few months of the year, I was really concentrating on the business and the admin side. So, getting things in place and getting a website up and running and starting blogging and starting putting procedures in place. And actually, dare I say, revisiting some of my old business skills in terms of sort of project planning and spreadsheets. But it's really helped in terms of the business course has helped in the pricing element. So saying, think about how many days you're going to be creative and think about how many days you're going to do the admin and factor the costs over both. And that's been a real revelation. So I try to be disciplined and do social media planning up front. And then I know, oh, I've got playtime to do sewing. It is tricky, but I wouldn't go back to doing IT audit.
That's good to hear.
Hmm.
You make your own creations. Do you do commissions for other people?
Yes, it's lovely. And now having got the website up, I'm really pleasantly surprised about how people will call me up and say, I've seen your work, I'm localish, can you make me a hat for a wedding? So literally yesterday I had a phone call from a lady who was in Devon, but she's coming up to this area, and so we had a consultation over the telephone, and she was holding up pictures of her dresses, and I was then running and getting hats and showing them to her. And so hopefully we're going to be working on something in face to face in real life. But yes, I love doing commissions to actually make people feel good, because if you feel good, it sort of comes out from your personality. So yeah, it's not about just looking good, it's how it makes you feel too.
Yeah, it gives you the confidence and extra verve to enjoy yourself and really get into the event. That's fabulous. Talking about making people feel good, I understand you also share your skills so others can have a go at your craft. Tell me more about that enterprise.
Oh, yeah. So this was something that again really came from lockdown. I think we'd missed having other adult company and chatting and getting dressed up. So one of the things that I really wanted to do was sort of spread the love of hats. And no, you can't wear a hat every day, though I usually do. Um, but wanting to do something community based too. So over lockdown, I've so appreciated local food suppliers and local businesses and so on. So I'm looking to do something called Fascinatees, where you will learn to make a fascinator and then wear it whilst you have tea and cake. I mean, it just seems to fit. And I have to thank, I've joined up with a scheme called the Mercury Creative Scheme, which is run out of the Mercury Theatre in Colchester. And I have an absolutely amazing mentor, Anthony Stewart Hicks, who's actually their pantomime dame. And I have to say thank you to him for the Fascinatees, because I was talking through the idea with him and he just went, that's Fascinatees. So copyright Anthony, that's absolutely brilliant. So yes, I'm now looking at venues, and I said I'm working hopefully with a lady who I found the most delicious cinnamon buns from during lockdown, and we will be then doing tea and cake and fascinators in around the local area.
Oh, what great fun! There's nothing better than tea and
I
cake.
know.
Other than that, do you have plans for the future, near or far?
I mentioned the Mercury Theatre. It's taken me into a totally different world, so sort of the performance side. And I got into it really because of the work that I'd done with the local theatre group, the Shush Experience. And then also, I'd been singing with rock choir all the way through lockdowns, and each week I would wear a different hat. So it sort of got me into performance wear. So in September, I'm actually going to be starting a theatrical millinery class in London, going and learning about that because it's so different, realizing that you have to have something that is light, stays on your head, and looks good from a distance, as opposed to, a couture wedding hat. So, but it's still hats and combines singing and dancing and things like that. So I love it. Another big thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing Cambridge Open Studios for the very first time. It's my first year in Open Studios, but they managed to find out that I had a background in corporate governance. So I'm going to be joining the team to help them with governance and going to be the company secretary, which is really strange because I used to audit company secretaries and now I'll be on the other side. But yeah, so looking forward to getting into that and actually combining some of my old job and new job.
There are many, many podcasts out there. It's difficult to know where to start. So I like to ask my guests for their recommendations. You're welcome.
I'd love to recommend the Mercury Theatre, Mercury Creatives podcasts, which are still in the middle of being edited at the moment. So they're not yet there yet, but they will be. And the other podcast that I listen to as I sew is the Conversations of Inspiration with Holly Tucker. And she talks to various different creative entrepreneurs about their journey. And it's absolutely fascinating and a real mix of people. And one of my local heroes, if you can say that, is Julie Dean from the Cambridge Satchel Company. And so she was interviewed by Holly about how she'd started up from her garage in Cambridge, sort of thing. So it's great.
Thank you. That sounds right up my street. How can people connect with you?
Well, I'm called Millhouse Millinery because my hat studio actually started in a windmill. So I'm millhousemillinery.co.uk and Millhouse Millinery on all the different social channels. So Instagram, Facebook Business, and Twitter, just for less words, is MH Millinery.
Thank you, Susan. It's been so lovely to speak with you today and find out all about your story.
Loved it.
Creativity Found is an Open Stage Arts production. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe, rate and review. If you would like to contribute to future episodes, visit ko-fi.com/creativityfoundpodcast. If you contact any of the artists featured, sign up to their workshops or buy their products, don't forget to mention Creativity Found Podcast. On Instagram or Facebook, follow @Creativity Found Podcast, where you'll find photos of our contributors' artwork and be kept abreast of everything we're up to.